Okay, Maimer Shlishi, up to the third essay in Kedusha, Ki Yetzer Leiv Ha'adam Harami Ne'urav. The thoughts of a person are ra from his youth. Okay, we're on page Kuf Yud Dalid, Maimer Shlishi. And letter Aleph. Vayar Hashem ki rabba ra'as ha'adam ba'aretz. V'chol yetzer machshavos libo rak al hayom. Vayinachem Hashem ki asa es ha'adam v'gomer. Vayomer Hashem emcha es ha'adam asher barasi me'al pnei ha'adama. So these are the psukim at the end of Parshas Bereshis that serve as the introduction as to the cause of the Mabul. And the pasuk relates that Hashem saw that the ra of people is exceedingly great, and quote Yetzer machshavos libo rak al hayom, and their thoughts were ra all the time, and therefore that brought about the Mabul. Says the Rebbe, HaTorah HaKedosha Kava, that the Holy Torah is establishing for us, Ki Makar Hara Shegaram Lahavias HaMabul, the source of Ra that was the cause to bring about the destruction, Limchos Es Ha'adam Me'al Pnei Ha'adama, to wipe away man, Hayamachma Sheyetzer Machshavos Libo Rak al Hayom, was because their thoughts were Ra all the time. Okay, so the Rebbe is being madish, is pointing out to us that the cause of the Mabul was, as the pasuk says, machshavos libo, the thoughts. Their thoughts were Ra. And again, he says, we find after the Mabul a similar statement. After the Mabul, in Parshas Noach, Hashem makes his promise with humanity through the sign of the Kehillas, the rainbow. It says, "Shenemar lo osif od lekalel asa adama." I will no longer curse the ground. Ba'avur ha'adam, because of man. Ki yetzer leiv ha'adam ra min ura, because a man's Yetzer, his desires are Ra from youth. Now these two things seem to somewhat conflict, because before the Mabul, it was the cause of the Mabul. Pasuk says, because man's thoughts are Ra all day, therefore I will wipe them out. And after the Mabul, it says that I will no longer curse the ground because of man, because their thoughts are Ra. So the essential difference is that there's a difference of hanhaga, of how Hashem was relating to the creations, that before the Mabul it was much more in a way of din, of strict judgment, whereas after the Mabul was in the way of racham, in ways of compassion. So whereas those thoughts that were ra was in din, in judgment, really the proper cause for destruction, after the Mabul, those very thoughts, even though in din are deserving of destruction, because of rachamim, Hashem's hanhaga now of rachamim, of compassion, would no longer be the cause for destruction. Nevertheless, it's
of the whole earth.
That's right.
Because we see parts of that in all kinds of ways, with tsunamis and everything else.
Right. This promise is that there wouldn't be the complete destruction as it happened then, because of the nature of Adam. So nevertheless, the pasuk.
But the nature of Adam was the same before the flood.
Correct. As I was pointing out, that Hashem's hanhaga, his way of relating with Adam, moves from din to rachamim, and therefore, in a way of racham, compassion, it's able to bear that avera.
We said, God changed. God changed.
Well, that's already a much more broader question. Not a difference, not a change. It's a way of relationship. Hashem doesn't change,
No,
but the ways of relationship always can always shift. That's the whole essence of tefillah, etc. So the Torah is pointing out that the source of the Ra that brings about this mass destruction, or would have, were it not for this Rachamim, has to do with thoughts. Says the Rebbe, HaTorah HaKadosh Madgisha, the Torah is emphasizing, Ki Makor Hara, the source of the Ra, Hu Yetzer Machshavos Libo, is the thoughts of a person. Hainu Inyane Chovos Lavavos. In other words, having to do with the duties of the heart. Now, as we explained before, that you can have what's called the Chovas HaYivarim, mitzvos, or conversely averos having to do with action, the deed, and then you can have averos having to do with thoughts and feelings. That's Chovos HaLavavos. And the Rebbe is pointing out that you see that the cause of this terrible Ra and the consequences has to do with thought more than deed. That the Torah is emphasizing thought. Uluchura kasha. Now this would seem at first to be difficult. Shari amru chazal shebi Yisrael ein machshava ra mitzarefes lamayisa v'lo danim ala machshavos. Chazal say when it comes to Yisrael, the Jewish people, that Hashem does not attach that machshava ra, negative thoughts, to make it like a maisa, a deed. In other words, like this. If a person thinks to do something that's a ra, but in action and in the end they don't really do it, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not consider that thought to be in action, as it never realized itself in full action. The Gemara says, though, when it comes to the nations of the world, Hashem does consider the thought to be actions. So that if they think to do Ra, it's mitzdarfa lamaisa, it's attached to already to be deed, action. And therefore they're judged on that thought already as done. Now, doesn't mean, when he says that they're not judged on thoughts, that we aren't judged on our thoughts. We certainly are. And the varying levels of in our relationship to Hashem, we certainly are. But that is not looked at in the level of action, a ma'aseh. Now, the general nature is that when something realizes itself in action, it's much more severe. So, for example, based in the courts, don't judge and don't execute judgment on thoughts, but on action. The same thing in Hashem's Hanhaga, Hashem's way of judging, the action is much more severe than the thought, general. And when something realizes itself in action, it's much greater. As our world is Olam HaMa'aseh. So, if a person has a thought of doing Ra, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not mitzdarfa l'maisa, attach it to be like a thought for the Jewish people. Certainly, though, if a person has a thought that's a Ra, that is definitely a pagam. It's certainly damaging, and it's a degree of a blemish. So the question is that, how is there such great severity attached to the thought? And we see that when it comes to Yisrael, the thought is not judged on that level of action. So Rebbe says like this. You have to say like this. Mishum she'enyane chovos halavavos, the whole matter of the duties of the heart, the mitzvahs relating to thought and feeling, v'chol HaMiddos, and all characteristics of a person, shemekorim b'leiv, the source is already in the heart, or in a person's instinctual thought. Right? The Torah's usage of the word heart always means like instinctual thought. like not to follow after your heart. Haim hamakar v'hashorish l'chol hamasim haraim shabadim. They're the source, they're the root of all deeds that are ra in the person. Haim hakovim es hamaasim. And they are the ones that really establish what will later be deed. In other words, well, it's true that maybe Hashem is not considering the thought to be action, but the thought is the source of the action. And the thought is the whole root of the eventual action. So the action, the deed that happens is really just the outcome of the middos, of the characteristics that are really rooted in a person's instinctual thought. And therefore, that's why it factors in so important in the judgment. Ukamamarim zal, like the teacher Chazal say, ha'ayin roa v'alev chomed v'az kli hamasa gomrim. The eyes see, so the eyes make a connection with something, and they bring it into your consciousness. Lev chomed, and that begins to cause the heart, the instinctual thoughts, to get excited, and the kli hamasa gomrim, the deeds, finish it off. In other words, let's see, what you say in the end, right? What you do in the end is the result of that. So that's just that's the gemar, it's the completion of it. But really, the initiation of it and what energizes it is the instinctual thought. Okay. So then we can now, the pasuk can now be explained like this: Yetzer leiv ha'adam ra min ne'urav. The thoughts of a person are ra from his youth, means tziyurei ha'tayvos bo min ne'urav. Means like the images of desires already established in the youthfulness of the person. For example, kina, taiva, kavod, kas, Atzvos, Atzlus, Chemda v'Kadoma. All are wonderful friends. Jealousy, desire, honor, anger, sadness, lethargy, desire, etc. All these things are natural to the person, and they begin to form ideas and even images in the consciousness of the person already from the youth. And they become second nature. So you don't have to be taught these things. You don't have to necessarily even observe these things, because they are part of what we call the nefesh habahamis, the behema nefesh, and they deeply implant themselves into the person's consciousness. They already have images and ideas and concepts, and it becomes really nature. So this means that Yetzer leiv adam ra min ne'urav, already from the youth, in other words, from the beginning, these middos are implanted in the person's being. Va'ad, to the point, to the point that when a person gets older and begins to understand how distant a person must be from all of these. So a person begins to get mature. They begin to learn Musar, the Chassidus, and they begin to refine themselves. And they discover, they realize how detrimental these middos are, and how we must learn to stay far from them. These they've already formed into established thoughts and ideas and images in the person. So it becomes a difficult battle, because the kina is what we naturally feel and we imagine. Let's say, again, when we see someone that say has a talent that we have, and they have it better than us, and they're more successful than us, so automatically the instinct, or what's called teva sheni, second nature, is that we begin to feel kina, jealousy. Or like Chazal say, it comes to jealousy, about Shaul, in regard to David, it says, Chol shadaite ve'ikne bei, that he felt like less than, and that's what's caused the jealousy. So seeing David being able to do all these things better, more successful, it automatically creates a certain chalishas adas, like the person feels diminished, and therefore the kinna follows. All of these things, whatever the cause of it is, they become the automatic reflex that we have to the given circumstance of life, and that becomes the initial thought, the initial midah, between, whether it's between you and Hashem, or between you and other people.
So you can rewire it.
You can.
Yeah, I know. I just heard of the Emunah Daily, the rabbi talks about a lot, being happy with what other people's talents are, and don't feel jealous. You want to be happy for them. You have what you have. They have what they have.
Yeah, that's right. This becomes all different. Being able to think of a thought of MS and being able to, implant it more deeply in the person.
Mm-hmm.
But now it's already working against a very an established nature, and even an imagination that you have when you observe, when you observe this. So, for example, in the area of taiva, so when we see things, automatically it produces the reflex of desire, I want that, and seichel, whatever my thought thinks, is already pushed aside, and then therefore I go for the taiva. That becomes the initial reflex of the person, because those images are already established from youth. Hamachshavos ha'elu shehu mutra al yado, those thoughts that the person is preoccupied by, bothered by, achshav hein siyurei hanefesh minov, they become these images. Ve'im HaMiddos neshtarshu bo, and then they become middos that are really implanted in the person. These are just like natural middos that we have. V'im ki einin averos mamish. Now, whereas the middos are not actually averos. The avera means when a person is over, he transgresses, he crosses over the boundary. So that's always established in the Torah by what is the mitzvah, what is the avera, and what's the halacha. So when have you been over? When have you crossed the boundary? So at that point, we can say avera. And therefore, between people, the courts will judge that. Between Hashem, Hashem judges it. Then you've been over. So the middos aren't averos per se. Halohema hamavios l'chal averos b'maisa. But of course, that's the cause. That's what brings about every avera, because avera just means you've crossed the line. But you cross the line when you've begun to move toward the line. And you begin to move toward the line when you have that feeling, that thought inside, and you accept it, and you accept it to be the truth, and that which causes you to operate, and you're not negating it in any way. So that already begins a movement toward the avera. So, for example, in the area of kedusha, if a person is not working in that area, so then already the natural taiva, the desire that they accept as part of themselves, is moving them toward avera. And then it's only a matter of time or circumstance where they're over. So that process begins with the middos. As we explained before, also Rav Chaim Vital said, the Torah doesn't speak about middos in by and large, because it precedes the Torah. The Torah is speaking to someone that is already acquiring and having these middos. And therefore the Torah is speaking about sort of like, okay, the bottom line. Saying, well, what's the point of where you've been over? So that's like sometimes people have the image mixed up. In other words, they think the Torah is like establishes in a sense the highest ideal. the Torah is actually speaking on the level of how you've crossed over the line. But prior to the Torah, the Middos is the higher ideal. So the person say, well, I'm a great guy because, I didn't commit maybe 5 of the last 10 commandments. So that's good, right? But it's much higher than that. Much higher than that. You didn't transgress them, but that a person already in the levels of their thought and their Middos are refining themselves much beyond that, the action.
Mm-hmm.
The truth is that it's the instinctual thoughts of the person that are the foundation and the source for all action. The Ram writes in Hilchos Tshuva, just like a person must do tshuva on averos that have action, theft and promiscuity, a person must search out middos that are ra, sheyeshlo, v'lashuv, and to do it and to return from them. Minakas, for example, anger. A person feels that they reach places of frustration that leads them to having inner anger or expressive anger. That midah, while it may not be an aveira at some point, is a place where a person has to do tshuva from. Which means that's all within the world of the person. It's not just where the Torah is operating on the level of deed. But the scope of the person includes the middos. And therefore, let's say in doing tshuva, cheshbon nefesh, figuring out where the person is, making a true calculation, you have to look there at the middos. Mina eva, from having hatred. Mina kina, jealousy. So as Robert points out, they'll require a person to dig deeper. For example, the Ramban says on the mitzvah of Yahavta l'recha kamocha, to love your neighbor like yourself. He says what it means is not that you emotionally love the person equal to yourself, because that's not what the Torah expects. A person always will have a stronger feeling and attachment to the self over another person. The Torah is saying to you is that you should seek out, want, and help bring about the good of a person in every area of life, like you want it for yourself, and not to hold back anything. If you want that you should be a wise person, you should be learned, you should be accomplished, that you should have necessary gashmius, money, whatever area of life closest to Hashem. Want that for another person. Seek it out for the other person. Bring it about from the other person. Don't hold back in any area. As he says, the nature is that a person will hold back in some area or another, not to seek out the betterment of their friend. So therefore, the Ramban said what the Torah really is commanding you is not to have kina, jealousy. In other words, you don't want something for your friend in a certain area because somehow that will diminish yourself. So therefore you want to hold on to something. So you're not going to maybe share with that person everything that you have, because perhaps I'll diminish you. Then you have to dig deeper than that. And you have to understand, well, so why is it that you would feel that way? So in every midah you have to often dig deep. So what really is the cause of that? That's one way to go, and that's a process of tshuva, or from the pursuit of money, or honor. The Rambam says these averos are more severe and difficult than deed. Why? When a person is immersed in these middos, It's a part of a person. Kashu the first man. It's very difficult to detach from them. You have a certain mindset you grow up with. You live in a certain society. Very hard to detach and to think otherwise. Certainly when you're living in that society. Like the Torah describes Avram Avinu, like he's called the Ivri because he stood on the other side. Very difficult for a person, even in thought, to counter what's around them in society, let alone to stand aside. But even to think differently, in a sense, you question your stability, your standing. V'chein Omer in the pasuk says, Yazov Rasha Darko v'ish Avein Machshavosav Adkan. Pasuk says that the Rasha should abandon his derech, and the man of Avera his thoughts. So you see that the Nevi'im are telling us that a person has to abandon the machshavos, the thoughts. That's already where tshuva has to be happening, digging deep on the level of the instinctual thought. Okay, Amnon, however, it appears Nira Yoser Liyashiv Kushan Niskeres Al Pi Mashmos Aksuvim. We can answer the aforementioned question about the importance that are given to the thought as to why that was a cause of destruction in a different way, where it says Vayar Hashem ki rabba ra'asa adam ba'aretz v'chol yetzer machshavos libo rak ra kol hayom. Hashem saw that the ra was exceedingly great, and their thoughts were ra all the time. Vayomer Hashem emchas adam v'gomer. Hashem said he'll wipe away man. Sha'onesh hanora hazeh hayal machshavos alev. We thought, we said already, that this avera and this consequence came about because of their instinctual thoughts. Sheyesh levar zos al pimadi yisa bezoar uvesvar makadoshim. We can explain this based upon what it says in the Zohar and the Holy Sfarim. Ki b'chol makom shenemar lashon ra. Whenever you find the word ra, this word ra, ha'kavana lepegame bris kodesh. The intent is these are referred to damages regarding the bris, yisod. In other words, the Torah is using the word ra as a code word for some sort of damage in the area of the yisod. Shekol mahusam hi metzios ra, that the whole nature of it is ra. And we see this expressly said in the Torah, in the story of Er and Onan, the sons of Yehuda. Like it says there, Vahi Er, Bechor Yehuda Ra B'nei Hashem. It says that Er, the eldest son of Yehuda, was Ra in the eyes of Hashem. Vayim Yisei Hashem, Hashem killed him. And that, the Chazal say, is referring to Begam of the bris, because he didn't want to impregnate Tamar, because she was beautiful, and therefore he spilled the seed. And the Torah describes it as Ra. It does use the word Ra. Now when it comes to this blemish, this midah, we do find that thought is like action. The Rabbeinu Yonah rules like this in the Shari Shuva. Sham Perish, there he explains, on the top of the page now, Ki al hirur avera, on the thought of an avera, shel gilu arayos, of promiscuity, afilu al pnuya, even if it's a thought on an unmarried woman, which from the Torah would not be a prohibition, have a isur gomer minatorah, itself is a total isur. So the thought of gili arayos itself is a complete isur. Va'afilu shelo al manas lasos, even if the person does not have the intention to carry it out. Why is that? It says va'ova akra, because you transgress, you already crossed the boundary in that thought. On the pasuk, tichsiv v'nishmartem mikol davar ra, you must guard yourself from every matter of ra. Now, what does that mean? It's a very general pasuk. Guard yourself from every matter of ra. Sheperush Chazal interpret the pasuk like this: Lo yaharher bayom v'yavo lidei tum b'layla. A person should not have thoughts of avera in the day that'll come to tumah at night. That those thoughts will bring about that he'll spill seed. So that is already what the pasuk means when it says you should guard yourself. Guard yourself means don't allow the thoughts to take you there. That's already what the Torah is defining as the mitzvah, the lo taseh. And therefore, in that regard, the thought already crosses the boundary. It's the avera. And so therefore, in that area, thought is like maisa. Thought is like the deed. Yesh alahavin atam, yesh lazbar, we can explain the reason. Ki hamachshava binyanim elu, thought in this regard, po'elas b'moach hadas, already brings about an effect in a person's mind. U'mevir l'dei maisa. In other words, the fact that it can happen, it can just happen, and at night, shows you the effect of thoughts. So therefore, you see the effect of that thought. In other words, when it comes to other thoughts, we can say the thoughts initiates. And they begin a whole process of thinking and even accepting a midah and eventually coming to a deed. But here when it comes to thoughts of avera, of the bris, you see that even without conscious thought, it brings about action. So you see the depth of the Torah that's considering thoughts of avera, this type, to be action. Because you see, in reality, how just that thought brings about action even without intention, even without moving forward and doing it. Whereas in other areas, it's sort of just initiating what we say as a process. Therefore, it's not like other machshavos, other thoughts that are ra. We're not judged on those thoughts, that they're like actions. It's only when it comes to gili arayos, these thoughts having to do with promiscuity, that the thought is like the deed itself. It's a very, very amazing insight from the Rebbe, how in this area, how penetrating thought is, how serious the thought is, and why it's already considered to be on the level of the deed. It's already done on the level of thought, and therefore different than other areas of the Torah. And the same thing we'll say
all other areas?
Well,
Is it itself unique, the promiscuity part of it? I was thinking of hatred. Right? If you're dwelling on hatred, it's almost as if you're starting to hate. Same thing.
Yeah, and actually there's a prohibition in the Torah not to hate your brother in your heart.
Yeah.
So hatred is already in the heart. So this is a very good point. In other words, you violate the Torah's prohibition of hatred, not by deed, by hating in the heart. So there are other areas in Avodah Zarah as well. The Gemara says thought of Avodah Zarah. It's like that. But in general, when it comes to the Maisa action, we don't say the thought is the action. The thought is a blemish, is a damage, but it's not the action. In certain areas, also when it comes to the jealousy, the 10th of the Aseres Adibros, lo sachmod, not to covet. So these are things that are also at the level of thought. So there are a few things that are in that category. Okay, that's the whole day for today.